If you get to know me, you'll understand that most parts of my personality are contradictions. I'm very introverted, but I'm also quite extroverted, outgoing, and I like to talk to people. I like to socialize. I like to be funny. I like to make jokes. I like to teach. But I also thrive on a lot of solitude. I have extremely left-wing beliefs, but I also have some right-wing beliefs. I'm very in touch with my sensitive side, my feminine side. I have a lot of female friends, more than men by far, but I'm also quite masculine. I like sports. I feel an internal aggression, a competitive spirit. I like boxing. I like fighting. I like lifting weights. I've been interested in every academic subject. I've studied them all. I've dated every type of women. I've been a part of every type of friend group. I have very few beliefs that are staunch, immutable truths to me that I would consider absolute. And open-mindedness, it doesn't sound like a bad thing, but this is because most people aren't very open-minded. They're very closed-minded and they're not objective. So when it comes to them, they might be the type of people, especially if you think of like type A corporate business types, that could benefit from doing a mushroom trip and expanding their consciousness. But for people that are naturally very creative and open-minded, you can't layer creativity on top of creativity and come up with productivity or groundedness. It just doesn't work that way by doubling down. And when you don't believe in anything that grounds you as like a religious truth, not necessarily religion related to religion, but with the same level of truth, the same authority, you have a very hard time establishing the rest of your life or keeping things in order, because you need a foundation. This is why humanity has been inventing religions for years, and it's why they believe things in spite of evidence to the contrary, when they've been taught it by people that they respected as authority figures or when they were young. It's why parents tell their kids that if they go out in the woods after dark, the boogeyman will get them. There's a biological function for this. It protects us. A rule is a rule, and it's not to be questioned. But for me, I was never like that. Even as a child, and I can go back very, very far and see that was always the case. The first time I ever had an inquiry into my mental health from someone else besides my mother, who was very keen on my development and my emotional maturity and being there for me as a parent. But when I was 5 years old, my father worked overseas and my mom took care of me and my two brothers. I have two brothers, three of us. One is older, one is younger. And she had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And she might not have been diagnosed, but she was dealing with the effects of it at this time for sure. Like energy management was a hard part for her. And she's a single mom of three very hyperactive, uniquely fucked up boys. So we hired a nanny. The nanny was very, very nice. I very much liked her. And she had a daughter who was, I think maybe, let's say between the ages of 9 and 11 when I was 5. I used a pseudonym for the daughter to protect her identity. Let's call her Sally. So me and Sally used to be friends because the nanny didn't have the resource to afford her own nanny for her daughter, so she'd bring her over, and my mom was of course okay with that. And they'd take us the mom would take us on outings and we'd play a lot. And I had a very big backyard with woods, so we'd hang out there, we'd play hide and seek and stuff like that. And one time me and the daughter, we ended up in a closet together, and just like kids experiment, we took off our clothes, but in my case, it went quite a bit further than you'd expect of a child. I believe we had intercourse, like a true penetrative intercourse. As far as I remember, I got an erection, and Sally led. She was the one who took control and showed me how to do it. And the reason why I'm quite sure that this is the case is because of what happened afterwards. So, sometime afterward, I go to my mother and I'm crying, and I say, "Mom, I think there's a baby growing inside me." And she's like, "You what, mate? What the fuck did you just say to me?" And so she questions me, and after some inquiry, she gets to what happened, and from what she said, there are descriptions that I gave that I just wouldn't have known unless they had occurred. I was 5 years old. Remember, we didn't have a computer. This is not pre-internet, but we didn't have a computer. There was just nowhere I would have learned it. We didn't have sex ed. So all of this led to finding out that the daughter, who was 9 to 11, had been sexually abused, and that's why she was, let's say, proficient at sex at an age that she certainly shouldn't have been. And that's another reason why I know that we had intercourse. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I lost my virginity when I was 5 years old. And since then, there's many people that tell me that can't be true physiologically. I fundamentally disagree with that. And there are also people that say that morally it can't be called sex because I couldn't consent, but based on her age, she couldn't consent either. And I don't feel like that's accurate. I don't believe that anyone else gets to define what happened to me, and mostly it's just that I don't feel traumatized by this at all, and I never did. And I'm very aware that there are many downstream effects and things that could have affected my psychosocial development and my sexual development and things of that nature that I wasn't consciously privy to, and I'm sure this is the case, but what actually happened is much more ironic because it's the way that it was dealt with that ended up traumatizing me or causing me issue rather than the incident itself. And to explain that, I have to go back a little bit to give some context. So I had very bad separation anxiety with my mother around this time since I was born. I would cry at school when she'd leave me or leave to go to the grocery store, or when she was sleeping, I would stay up all night and I'd sneak into her room and quietly, not to wake her up, just check to see that her rib cage was expanding so I knew that she was still breathing. And so the school had noticed that I was having these problems and with crying, and at one time, because my mom was sleeping at, I guess, some odd angle, I thought that she wasn't breathing. And because I thought she was dead, I didn't try to wake her up, and I was afraid because I thought that she was a corpse and all this. So I went and called 911, and then 911 came, and because I had been dealing with the court trauma that came out of the sexual abuse with the daughter from her father, like I had not testified in court, but I had talked to detectives about this, and the school was aware that I'd been crying. It all got conglomerated into one confusing pathological problem, and they didn't listen to the timeline that I explained to them, because my issues with separation anxiety predated the incident with Sally. And when they would ask me about this, it was as if they were trying to get an answer that they wanted, which was that I was traumatized by this sex. And I wasn't. And what I was very emphatic about, because I understood this, was that I was proud of it. Not as a sexual conquest, but I was proud because I understood, oh, my sexual escapade with this girl led her to stop being hurt by her father. I've protected this girl. And the only answer that they gave was that a child this young cannot possibly believe that a parent can hurt their child, or something along that lines. And my mom was like, you don't understand this kid. This kid is brilliant. This kid is smart. He's telling the truth. I'm his mother. I'm a lawyer. If I thought there was any indication that he was seriously traumatized by this issue, more than the trauma of having to keep talking about it and have you guys not listen to him, I would be the number one advocate for my son. And they just would not accept that. And of course the optics of it, because she was in the public eye as a lawyer, were terrible. Of saying, oh, I'm trying to pull my son out of counseling for an ostensible rape or molestation. I mean, I understood that too. I knew all these things, even at that age. And in a way I might not have been able to verbalize perfectly, but I understood that. And so my mom really didn't like them either, but I had to go to counseling from then on. It just was like a non-negotiable thing, and no matter what I said, they would always bring it back to the sexual incident, and I got really tired of it, because I understood, okay, this counseling is supposed to help me, and I do have an issue. I cannot leave my mom, and I knew that. But every time I said that, it would go back to the sex thing, and they would tiptoe around it because they didn't want to say things, and I understood the meta game that they were playing, and I would tell them, like, no, I understand you're saying this, but I'm that. And it would either just freak them out, or they would ignore it, or someone else would come. I went through like 20 therapists because they didn't want to deal with me. It was kind of like the Good Will Hunting scenes where he deals with one and they get tired of him. And I mean, the advanced kids at these age were reading Harry Potter. I mean, let's say I'm like 7 or 8 now. I was reading Aldous Huxley. I was reading Freud. I was doing psychoanalysis on myself for fun. I was journaling and creating characters and worlds and writing horrible stories and all this. And I just kept thinking, why am I able to find out more about myself on my own than the adults who get paid to do this? And I asked my mom, like, why are some adults less smart than some children but still get the respect of an adult? And I don't get the respect of an adult, but I am equal. And, very profound things for a child to think. And going back to the child who gets told the boogeyman in the woods concept, there was no boogeyman for me. But I was being told that there was, in spite of evidence to the contrary. Another thing they would always do is they'd bring up my weight, and I was fat, and I was bullied, and it's logical, and it wasn't wrong that it played a role in my issues, but it was the way they went about it, because it was never direct. Like, they were afraid to offend me or something. And I was very honest about my weight whenever it came up. But they would say things like, have you ever thought of eating a banana for breakfast because fruit makes you happy? And of course, I knew what that really meant was, we think you probably eat like shit and you're fat and all your problems are because you got raped and you're fat. And I was just tired of it. I was bored. I was extremely bored going into therapy, and I was at best, and I was frustrated at the other times. And at this time, there was a growing divide amongst my teachers. Some wanted to put me in advanced schooling, and some thought I was like an abject moron. And we had just done our first standardized testing, like provincial testing that everyone does. And I was one of 15 kids in the province that got every answer correct on the math, the reading, and the writing. And I did very well on the math and the reading, and I did, the 98th percentile or whatever on the writing. And instead of being lauded for this, they thought I plagiarized or cheated. And ironically, I'd have to be pretty smart to find a way to cheat when nobody else in the class got as many questions right as I did, so there's no one to copy off. And it's double blind in the sense that the teachers don't know what the answers are because it's on a Scantron that's randomized, and they send it off to a computer to evaluate the scores. So for the very reason that they're trying to prevent cheating, because these are studies that the government uses to make decisions with their capital, and that's important ostensibly, but they don't necessarily do a good job of allocating capital. But that's another topic for another time. So some wanted to hold me back, right? Because I had this like autistic savant profile, and a lot of this was just boredom and frustration and this useless therapy, and I decided I was going to turn this into something fun. Like I was going to use my imagination to turn this into a game, because it all seemed fake anyways. It seemed like a game, and they wanted to hear something. So I started seeing if I could lead them to answers. I wanted to see if I could create like a proxy version of myself, a character, different characters with different mental defects that I had read about in Freud or other books that I was reading. And without saying anything directly, I wanted to see if I could make them give me that diagnosis, and if they did, I would consider it like, oh, I got a point. Like it was literally a game to me. I started off with things that were very easy, like trying to seem like an arsonist, but all I had to do was mention fire, and then, so I was like, oh, that's too easy. Then I did advance to things like schizophrenia, and I wanted to be. I considered it dishonest if I just said something like, "Oh, I hear voices," like I knew that was too easy. So, trying to make it look authentic, I do things like I was trying to act. I was trying to be an actor. I'd trail off while the counselor was talking to me, and I'd like that, like as if like I heard something or saw someone in the room, and it worked. And they'd ask like, "Hey Zach, do you hear something?" And I'd feign ignorance, like, well, I hear you talking, and then they'd be like, well, do you hear anything else? And then I'd be like, they don't want me to talk about them, like, I'd fuck with them, and it was their fucking fault that I was doing this, in my estimation, so I felt justified, and I didn't know of the damage I might be doing to myself. I understood I might be doing something wrong to them, but I didn't understand the deep consequences this would present to myself for later on. And this lasted for a few years, maybe till I was about 10 or 11. And okay, so that banana thing, it went on and on. They literally they brought up bananas in the morning all the time, and I actually ate quite well. I just ate a lot, and I mean, that's another subject, but I was so tired of hearing about the banana Peelspiel. That's what I called it. I wrote about it all the time when I was a kid, and that'll come up later on as an integral turning point in this story. But I decided I want to make these people feel bad for what they've done. Because I can't do that by being truthful, I'm going to be very dishonest. So I was smart enough to realize that a banana could be a phallic symbol, and because they thought I had this sexual trauma, I felt like, oh, I can make them realize that they're traumatizing me by bringing up the banana, because I make a mental connection back to my apparent sexual abuse, like I have some kind of PTSD or whatever. And so I did this, and they clearly felt bad, and then went on to apples instead of bananas, and I probably said something like, well, sometimes those bananas come with those apples, like making a reference to testicles or something. Like, I was just an absolute piece of shit, but I was so on the ball with this. I realized and felt like I was just so much smarter than the teachers, and I was like, this is not supposed to be right. And at this time, around this time, I watched the movie The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher, and there's a scene in it where he gets put back into his consciousness as an 8-year-old boy while him and his friends are getting abused, and he speaks as an adult to the abuser, and the abuser's like, how are you doing this? like like as if he's too intelligent, and he's confused, like he's broken reality. And I related to that so much, and this created a little bit of an actual delusion that I never would have come across otherwise, where I wondered, am I an adult in a child's body? And because I hit puberty very early, like 8, 9 years old, like I had chest hair in fifth grade and stuff like that, it seemed like there was all these little factors that seemed to confirm it, right? And that's a little bit of a side story, but anyways, so I was like I said, I was getting really frustrated with all this, and about the banana peel thing. I wrote this story called the Banana Peelspiel, and what it was basically a long confessional about everything that had happened up until then. The fact that I had made up everything, that I was feigning all these mental illnesses, and I was manipulating everybody because I had gotten frustrated that nobody listened to the truth, and that I was bored and pissed off and nobody's taking me serious. And I'll never forget one of the lines in it, because I think I was very far ahead of my time in knowing this, not just advanced from my youth, but based on like our current era and how people act today. I wrote something like low status people use sympathy as a currency because they aren't competent in anything laudable, so they get confused and try to dominate the only hierarchy they can relate to, which is trauma. So they try to be the most traumatized person. And so if anything, you'd think I'd want to use my apparent sexual abuse as leverage for people to feel sorry for me, but I don't. So it clearly cannot be the case that I was sexually abused, at least not in my personal definition. Maybe by a legal definition, or yeah. And clearly I didn't write it using all those words, but it was very salient, and I know this because my mom ended up reading it, because they called us into the office, and she said it was very clear. It was too well written is the problem. And they thought that I just ripped it off, right? And of course, it was also self-confirming, because they didn't directly say that I plagiarized it, but I understood. Yeah, you think I plagiarized this. I get it. And because I was able to intuit that, they're like, no, you can't be smart enough to know that that's what we're thinking. And it was just always self-confirming. And because of this, I thought, like, reality is fake. It's all fake. It can't be. It's a simulation. I'm not dealing with something that's random here, because I can control it. I can predict it. I can predict the future. I'm magical. I'm brilliant. I'm God, right? And I just couldn't believe that they considered this a punitive issue instead of a cry for help. And it wasn't even a cry for help subconsciously. Like, I was conscientiously thinking, this is my next step, because I don't want to do this anymore. Let me try this. Let me write it in very clear terms and show them that I'm intelligent, and they'll finally understand, because writing is a mark of intelligence. And because I hadn't been trying hard in school at the time, because I just didn't care. So the few teachers that were on my side thinking, oh, he is really a genius, they had kind of faded or lost conviction. And they just didn't believe that I wrote it. They thought this is how stupid it was. I said, here, look in my backpack, and I brought out books like that I was reading at the time, like Aldous Huxley, or Freud, or I mean, those are the two I really remember. But I knew I was reading a lot of advanced stuff because my mom owns a bookstore, right? I mean, we have 20,000 books in my house, and I was introduced to this early. My father is a scientist, my mother is a lawyer. Of course, I was introduced to academics early and often. And I said, look, like, I'm intelligent. Look what I'm reading. And they said, you can't read that. And I said, do you want me to read it out loud and tell you what it means? Of course, maybe I don't understand it at the grad school level, but I could read it. I had to consult a dictionary often. This is how I learned to expand my vocabulary quite well, is through this process. So I guess it had some ancillary benefits, as horrible as it might have been. And then they said, yeah, you probably ripped this essay out of that book. And I said, bullshit, read it, read it. And they're like, no, it's long, I can't look through it. And this was, I mean, the internet existed, but there was certainly no advanced search terms. And I remember getting very angry and saying, like, maybe you just can't fucking read it. And I stormed out. And I went home and I got all my journals that served as evidence that I had been plotting this and making all these characters and messing with the fabric of reality, and they just would not look at them. They did not look at them, and I didn't have the cleanest writing either, so that didn't help. But yeah, so I was just a very imaginative kid that needed somebody to listen to me. And my mom was lost. She had MS. She had very little mental or physical energy, and she was kind of undergoing the same struggle as I was, actively from behind the scenes, trying to advocate if she could, but she was also dealing with both my brothers. And at that time, I started realizing how much this was hurting her. So to her, I played a character where I was okay. When I was in her company, I was a stoic for a childhood version of stoicism. I was a stoic, put together child that didn't have any issues because I wanted her to be able to have time to take care of my brothers and not be upset by this. With the teachers, sometimes I played who they wanted me to be. Sometimes I messed with them. It was all very confusing and hard to follow, even for me, despite the fact that I wrote this down and I had quite a good memory, and my cognition was very good at this time. This was before I did and had a lot of things happen to me that destroyed my memory and messed with my mental functioning. And it wasn't just the teachers that I was getting tired with, it was the parents as well. See, the neighborhood I grew up in is one of the richest in all of Canada, and it was a complete bubble of morality. I'd say moral sterility, and the value structures are these totally bizarre golf, business, corporate type of people that don't poop or believe that they're plastic people. They're the people that exist on the Real Housewives. They had a Real Housewives of Vancouver for a reason, right? This is one of the cities that is like that, and this is a suburb of that city, so anything you see of Vancouver being a bubble, it's exaggerated in this suburb. And one memory that sticks strongly in my mind was that I had a lot of friends where they lived in these perfectly clean, sterile houses, and my house was like a home. We were allowed to live in it. We cleaned it, but we weren't slobs, but we were allowed to make things messy as long as we cleaned them up. And I'd go in this house, my friend's house. I won't say her name. Let's call her Jane. And I go in Jane's house, and her parents, or her, it was usually her because her parents would never be direct with me. So always translated through her, and she'd say, "No, you can't sit there." And it's a couch. Where am I supposed to sit? And she would get a towel and put it down, and I was like, am I dirty? And I wasn't. I was clean. I had showered, whatever. But sometimes my clothes were a little ripped. I didn't care about clothes. I wasn't materialistic, and despite the fact that we lived in an upper class neighborhood, my parents weren't they didn't care about that shit. They were hippies. We were very misplaced, but my father moved us here and didn't live here, and we kind of were stuck. He was the breadwinner because my mom was only doing pro bono work as a lawyer, and she had MS, like I said. And so I'm at this house, and they're like, no, we just need to keep the house clean or whatever. And when I left, I looked through the windows because they had these big glass windows, and as soon as I got out, they scrubbed it, and then they sat down on that couch, and I was like, oh, it's not that they're keeping it clean from reality, they're keeping it clean from me. I'm dirty. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm scum. I'm subhuman. I'm a creature. I'm an animal. So I understood that that's how people thought of me, and because it was a very gossipy town, all the issues I had already gone through had been relayed to a lot of parents, which might have been why they thought this in the first place. And then, this anecdote was probably um, led through the grapevine of parents gossiping about bullshit. And I got really upset with it, and I got tired of it. And like I said, they didn't like my mom because they thought she was just some crazy pot smoking hippie, because she was a lawyer on paper but only did nonprofit work helping battered women, and um, doing work for prisoners to get better rights and things like that. She'd go visit prisoners, and they're like, "You're doing work not for money? That's insane." That's the type of people they were. They couldn't understand it. And I still had friends at this point, but few. And many parents were telling their kids I was fucked up and to avoid me, and there was rumors and all this. And then there was this one incident where I decided I was going to take a stand, right? It was at this Halloween party. I think I was about 9 years old. And there was this other fat kid. There's two fat kids in my school. I live in Canada, which is a lot less fat than the United States. So only two fat kids in my school, which maybe the Americans can't relate to. And I was one of them. And his name was Jason. That's a real name, but whatever. Anyways, he was very outgoing and popular while I wasn't, and I was thought of as weird. And parents and teachers always confused him with me. And I just didn't clear it up because I felt bad, and I knew they'd feel bad about it. I had a very strong sense of compassion and emotional intelligence to know that they would feel bad, or at least should. I might have been wrong about that aspect. So this parent said, "Oh, hi, Jason," and I just decided, no, I'm not Jason. And so I looked at her in the face. There's a lot of people around me. It's a big gathering. And I said, "I have an announcement to make." And a couple people turned, and most of them didn't hear me. And I said, "I have an announcement to make." And I waited until everyone was looking at me, and I said, "You've all been calling me Jason for years because he's the other fat kid. My name is Zach, and you won't forget it from now on." And I stared them all down, right in the eyes. And they blinked first. And I felt like a god. I felt powerful. I felt amazing. I felt like I had taken back what they had taken from me. And they were horrified and petrified. And because I had this emotional intelligence, I could recognize these emotions from everything I had read and everything I had intuited. I knew how they felt. And knowing how they felt gave me control over them. And I thought, I can do anything. I own the world. I can predict the future. The next day, the kid of that parent told me he wasn't allowed to hang out with me anymore. Because these fucking prudish pussies, man, they cared about their looks, um, their outward appearance, like both physically and um, I guess their status, just so much that like this was the worst thing that had ever happened to them, and it was just hilarious in a way. Like the humor wasn't lost on me. In fact, I enjoyed it, but I was just such an outsider. And at that point, like that marks kind of the last time I was able to at all fit in, or made an attempt to. And that's when I started to become very defiant. That's when I said, "No, I've tried to play by the rules. I've tried to play your game, and it's my time now. It's my fucking time. Like, I'm gonna tear your fucking worlds apart, and I know how. Nobody can contend with me. I'm a force amongst the gods. Oftentimes, I think of Mike Tyson and the things he used to say. "I'm a god. No one can match me. I'm impetuous. My style is impetuous. I'm like a god. Blah blah blah." That kind of shit. Like I really believe that, and he was one of my heroes because I boxed very young, and I looked up to that, and I thought, you know what? I understand what he's saying. Like that power that he has. I just knew that his isn't a physical dominion. Mine isn't an intellectual dominion. But I wanted that physical dominion as well, which is one of the reasons I went into boxing later on. But that's a side story. I guess just ending this off, I didn't know who they wanted me to be, but I knew they wanted me to be somebody other than myself. And I knew that most people were trying to be people other than themselves. They just weren't as good as I was. Or they were better at following the crowd, or they were more willing to. I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I didn't know what I was allowed to be and how to navigate. I was getting in trouble for telling the truth, but they told me to tell the truth. I was getting in trouble for lying. There was just no answer. None of the characters I tried on worked, and I would make up another character and they were rejected. So I kind of went entirely inward, antisocial. I didn't say anything for a long period of time, and I was plotting, and I had very awful fantasies. I don't remember if Columbine had happened at this point. I don't think I was aware of it if it had, but I had beliefs like that, and I remember devising blueprints that were similar to that. Obviously, I never went through with them. And I got diagnosed with every mental health condition in the books because I was still going through therapy like this. But I just thought, you've completely misinterpreted everything, and look at what you've caused. I was so aware of everything that was going on when they'd say it. I was like, okay, you're trying to diagnose me now with bipolar. You're trying to diagnose me with borderline, like, because I had read about it, and I knew enough, and I wasn't crazy. I was very cognizant. I was very local to my own brain. I could logically deduce everything. I might have been feeling things that were delusional or experiencing the world in a delusional way, but I still had the salience to know what was expected of reality. I just didn't agree with that reality. And I got into doing things like vandalism and smoking pot very young, and trying other drugs and stealing and just all this stuff. And every time I got in trouble, it came back to my sexual trauma, and it just compounded on itself, and it all became a game for me. And when everything is strategy, when everything is objective, you don't know who you are or what you actually believe. It's all done for the purpose of tactical survival or hedonism. That's it. My personality is a game or a mechanism of survival. And I wanted to play all the games because I got bored when I played one for too long. See, personality is supposed to be a combination of your social environment and your own proclivities. You inherit it. You inherit some things from your parents in terms of genetics. You inherit things in terms of their teaching, and you inherit things based on the world around you, and you adapt a little bit. There's always an agreement between the external and the internal. But I was missing half the equation, and I was so good at engineering any result I wanted, manufacturing what people would say to me. I felt like I could predict the future because I could manipulate reality. I was a god, and that's a power that I wasn't willing to let go of at any cost. But it would become less and less clear, like, who I was. I mean, I was so young that I hadn't even developed an authentic self yet. But I had all these wonderful, interesting, sweet parts of me that wanted to come out, and they just couldn't. And so they pathologized, and this maximized in the coming years. And of course, I have a million anecdotes later in life of things I could talk about this that relate to this subject, but I think I'll end this here because it's already been very long, and the point of this was to explain the origin of this concept. I think it's possible that because I seem so objective and unemotional while telling this, like my ability to be dispassionate and objective confuses people into believing that these didn't occur, that I made this up, or that I'm very dissociated from myself. I think perhaps that's it. I am dissociated from myself, but who wouldn't be?